Chris Doyle joins me, commentator on Middle Eastern politics and director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding. Chris, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Sheila.
Is this solely about trade deals, or is there some serious shenanigans going on as well diplomatically?
Well, it's always difficult to know with Donald Trump, but I think the priority of this visit to these three countries was always to sew up huge deals that he likes. He wanted $1 trillion of investment into the United States from Saudi Arabia alone. He's going to get a lot of investment deals, it's true. But also, and perhaps the more difficult issues have been the political ones, the diplomatic ones, where he's having to engage with Middle Eastern powers on the issue of Iran, on the issue of Syria, and on Israel Gaza. All of these are issues that he would like to see, so he says, to be wrapped up, to try to draw to an end. And he wants to have deals, as we know. He's famous for saying that. And it has to be said that the push on Syria is something that people didn't expect him to perhaps go so far. There were rumors that he would meet the new president of Syria, Ahmed al-Sharaa, but there wasn't a real story that he was going to order, as he has done, the lifting of US sanctions on Syria. So when that does actually happen, and I should stress that there's a lot to go through here. Congress would have to approve many of those sanctions to be lifted because they became a law under the Caesar Act. There are also UN sanctions that actually prescribed certain figures within Syria as terrorists, certain organizations. So there's a long way to go to the full lifting of sanctions. But I think for Syrians who live in a country where 90% of them live below the poverty line, this actually gives them an horizon that they haven't had for some time. They can see economic life perhaps coming into view. And hopefully in the months to come, we can see the opening up of that economy.
And we've seen in areas of conflict and war all over the world in history, haven't we? Even just recent history, that where there is prosperity, there is typically a better chance for peace and security. Doesn't mean it comes easy, but there's a better chance, perhaps.
Of course, and naturally, families in Syria, just like families anywhere else, they want their children to go to university, have jobs, be able to have the sort of opportunities that we would all aspire to. And what you see in Syria at the moment is barely any power. I was in Syria last month in the northeast. You saw ramshackle generators providing electricity. There was no mains electricity. You had wildcat oil fires flaring off, polluting the atmosphere. I mean, there was no economic life at all. And US sanctions, particularly US sanctions, are a prime reason for that. For example, I mean, I have in-laws in Syria. I cannot send them electronically any money at all because of US sanctions. And that needs to change because I think remittances from a very large expatriate Syrian population across the globe would be a key boost to the Syrian economy. And of course, realistically, without the lifting of US sanctions, you're not going to get crucial investment. Which businessman is going to invest in a country that is still under sanctions, even if some of them are suspended? They need that certainty.
Yeah, and that then frees up ordinary people to resume their business, set up a business, get a job in a sector, get going again, essentially.
Absolutely. And Syrians are a very entrepreneurial people. I'm sure that small and medium-sized businesses will take off. The agricultural sector, for example, which hasn't had any inputs, fertilizers, and all the rest of it. So a lot of Syrian land, which is very fertile, has been left unfarmed. So it'll boost that sector. It will allow all sorts. It'll boost the health sector, the education sector. So it could be very, very welcome news if this gets implemented down the line, but it'll take some time.
And to say that Donald Trump's agenda, I mean, we'll see what the ultimate agenda is, as in what he ends up doing and saying and going and who he meets. But there's so many conversations about what might be achieved by his visit. Is he in Qatar? Is he going to sort something out with the hostages and with Gaza? Is, in Iran, and the deal with Iran is looming over all of this? Is Saudi Arabia interested in joining the Abraham Accords? There's just, I mean, you name it, it's there on the list, isn't it? There's so much to wade through.
There's a huge lot because there's a lot of unresolved conflicts and issues and crises in the Middle East. And I think collectively, the international actors, I don't even call it a community anymore, have been very poor at resolving conflicts in recent
Mm,
decades.
mm.
I think that it's very unlikely that Saudi Arabia is going to be normalizing with Israel anytime soon. But I do think that we've just had the fourth round of talks between the US and Iran, and those are now direct talks, that there is a prospect of some sort of deal. How solid that deal will be between the US and Iran is another matter. I think there's a fear that this could be rushed. So that could be positive. I think on the issue of hostages in Gaza and what's going on between Israel and Gaza, the blockade of Gaza, the ongoing atrocities, I think we're a long way from getting an agreement. But there is an increasing distance between the United States, between the Trump administration, and Prime Minister Netanyahu. There's a lot of criticism. And there are a lot of differences on Iran, on Gaza, on indeed the Houthis in Yemen that have opened up. And I think that will be very troubling to the Israeli leadership. But action on Gaza, and there's just been an urgent question in Parliament about this, is absolutely vital because the population is absolutely on its knees. It is being starved. And ending that, ending the atrocities, getting the hostages released, getting Palestinian detainees who've been arrested without trial released, all of this must be part and parcel of a proper package to end what has been a horror over the last 19
I
months.
heard one commentator on a podcast the other day reflecting on the apparent exclusion of Benjamin Netanyahu in all of this, is that he will bide his time, wait until Donald Trump has finished, bestriding the Middle East like a king. He'll go back home. He'll go all MAGA again. He'll focus on domestic policies, and then he can go about his business as usual. Is that naive of Netanyahu, do you think? If indeed that's what he's thinking. It was a theory.
Well, actually, it is stated Israeli policy, Israeli spokespeople have said that once the Trump visit is over,
They will
they
resume the operation.
they will proceed with this expanded military operation for which they've called up thousands of reservists, and they'll therefore go in even harder into Gaza, whatever that means, because they've been smashing it up to such an extent it's hard even to imagine or to put into words. But I think it would be naive if they don't in Israel, in the leadership, start to take, understand the international anger that was so clearly expressed by Tom Fletcher, the head of UN OCHA, the UN aid chief, yesterday at the Security Council, when he urged them, he begged them to do what they could to prevent genocide in Gaza. That was the toughest language we've heard from him. But
Now,
it shows really how the humanitarian community is at a loss, in total despair about the situation, and that the world has not done enough.
Benjamin Netanyahu, spokesman this morning on the radio, responded to Tom Fletcher's statement and to the starvation that's clearly happening there, and said, "Look, we have sent millions of tons of aid. I mean, they're not at the moment, but sent millions of tons of aid into this place. It has been heavily taxed by Hamas. It has been stolen by Hamas. It has been used by their fighters." This is what they say each time they are criticised for the blockade. Do you say that is not justifiable at all, or it doesn't justify the blockade?
Well, it's simply not accurate. He referred on the Today program today to the amount of aid that not Israel, but the international community got in during the cessation of hostilities between January and March. And on the 2nd of March, Israel announced it was blocking all food, water, medicine, and aid going into Gaza. So it's an openly stated policy. And Israel Katz, their defense minister, made it very clear that this was being used as a pressure lever on Hamas. Now, it's utterly illegal in international law to use collective punishment and to use starvation for political purposes as a weapon of war. So I'm afraid they are scraping the bottom of the barrel to try to justify the unjustifiable. And at the moment, you're looking, as the latest assessment by the IPC has shown, which is the absolute gold standard in such things, that 500,000 Palestinians in Gaza are at starvation levels. Now, that is unacceptable. It will continue to get worse. It's 70 plus days now of this blockade. And those figures are going to just get worse and worse by the day, not gradually, but very steeply, unless there is not just some minor delivery of aid into Gaza, but aid delivered at scale to those in need, regardless of their political affiliation, not in a militarized fashion, and certainly
And
not in
yeah,
the way that the
and
US and
it's
Israel are proposing.
well, it's hard to know whether that US proposal around it with Israel's vague cooperation, I suppose, it's hard to know whether that touches the sides, really, isn't it? All right, you seem
Well,
to be saying it
what
won't.
we do know, though, is it really violates all the global humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, independence, and impartiality, that aid is delivered to those in need, regardless of who they are. And what we're seeing here is vetting of those who receive aid, that if you went to one of these bubbles, as they're calling them, you wouldn't be able to go back to where you were in case that aid landed up in Hamas. And simply this excuse of saying that Hamas takes the aid. Well, firstly, they haven't provided evidence, but it's actually not an excuse in international law to allow you to starve a population, which, by the way, this is a population in a territory that Israel occupies and under the Fourth Geneva Convention has the responsibility for its well-being. It has direct legal responsibility. And the problem is, we're not seeing the international community insist with actions that Israel uphold that responsibility. Because, in fact, we as Britain and other countries shouldn't be providing that aid. It should be Israel. It is the power that is responsible for the humanitarian well-being of the population within Gaza.
And can I ask you a final question about, I mean, some of the images we're seeing here from the Middle East, from the Trump trip? The meeting today with the leader of Syria, we've talked about. He's been in talks, could even still be in those talks, with the Emir of Qatar. If there is literally no contact, no visible contact with Benjamin Netanyahu, but he talks to the Emir of Qatar and with their close connections to Hamas, what might that do to the whole picture, do you think?
Well, I think that in going to those three, GCC states, Gulf states, Saudi, UAE, and Qatar, as I said, it emphasizes the primary goal of this, tour is about contracts, including arms contracts and the works. And of course, then in going to Qatar, he will be discussing the situation in Gaza and hostages. Now, it's not that he hasn't met Netanyahu. Netanyahu was in the White House only a few weeks ago. So they do have, and I think that was the second time that Netanyahu's been in the White House since the beginning of the year. So it's not like Trump has cut him off. But what there is clearly a tension between the two of them. I mean, if you want to sort of sum it up, Trump wants to wrap up these conflicts. He hasn't really got to the detail of how that's going to happen, but Netanyahu is actually quite keen on amping all of these conflicts up. We've seen that in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Syria, where Israel's been bombing a great deal. So Trump's new Syria policy runs contrary to Israeli wishes.
But the jury is still
And of
out on
course,
Syria, isn't it? Don't you think? On the Syrian
absolutely.
leadership,
And
it's
no,
still
I'm
out.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm very cautious and skeptical about the new leadership in Syria. I think that there are very real reasons to actually hold back some of this sanctions relief to make sure that it's benchmarked according to progress, because a lot of Syrians are very worried that it won't be inclusive enough. There'll be communities in Syria that are left out, that are excluded, or even as we saw in March, we saw some really nasty attacks
On
in
Alawites, the political
on Alawites in
Islamism,
the coastal
yeah,
region and
starts to
many other
come.
communities. It was something that many Kurds and Christians were telling me in northeast Syria, the fears that they had, particularly provoked by those
Okay.
attacks. It could be
Chris,
them next.
I must leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Chris Doyle, commentator on Middle Eastern politics, director of the Council for Arab British Understanding.